My grandmother said I was too independent, so I became helplessly dependent on her. My grandmother Ellen has this thing where she makes these little comments about how I never need anyone. And it's not natural. Like when I bought my first car by myself, she was like, oh, well, I guess you don't need family for anything anymore. Or when I fixed my own sink, she said I was acting like I knew everything instead of asking for help. I usually just ignored it because my mom would tell me that's just how grandma shows love. But last month was the breaking point. We were at my cousin Alyssa's engagement party, and I was telling everyone about my promotion at work. I just become the youngest marketing director at my company, and I was really proud of myself. Grandma sat there shaking her head, and when I finished, she looked at everyone and said, she never calls me, never visits, thinks she's too good for her old grandmother. I felt my cheeks burning, but nobody defended me. They all just looked uncomfortable. Alyssa tried to change the subject, but grandma kept going. She started telling this story about how her friend's granddaughter calls her every day for advice and how close they are. She went on about how I'd rather struggle alone than admit I needed anyone. My aunt patted grandma's hand and said something about how some people just show love differently, but the damage was done. That night I went home and made a decision. If grandma wanted me to need her, then I'd need her for absolutely everything. I started the next morning by calling her at 6 a.m. asking how to make coffee. She was confused at first, but when I explained I wanted her guidance, she was thrilled. She gave me a 20-minute explanation about water temperature and bean grinding and sounded happier than I'd heard her in years. An hour later, I called again asking which shoes matched my outfit better. She was delighted and spent 15 minutes discussing color coordination. Then I called about how to write a professional email, and she practically glowed through the phone telling me about proper business etiquette. By noon, I'd called her 8 times, and she was bragging to grandpa about how I was finally valuing her wisdom. The next day, I stepped it up. I called during her morning shows asking how to boil an egg, and she cheerfully muted the TV to explain the process. I called during her book club asking if I should use fabric softener, and I could hear her telling her friends how close we were getting. I called during dinner asking how to program my TV remote, and she walked me through it step by step while her food got cold. By the end of the week, I was calling her 20 times a day. I'd call about which route to take to work, whether to use a blue or black pen, or how many ice cubes to put in water. At first, she loved being needed for every tiny decision, but I noticed she was starting to sound a little less enthusiastic when she answered the phone. I started showing up at her house too. One night, I knocked on her door at 9 p.m. with my laundry basket saying I couldn't figure out the washing machine settings. She was in her pajamas watching Jeopardy, but tried to act pleased as she showed me how to separate colors from whites, something I'd been doing since college. Her smile looked forced as she explained water temperatures. The real turning point came when I showed up at 2 a.m. on a Thursday, crying because I had a bad dream and needed family comfort. My grandpa answered the door looking confused. I pushed past him wailing about how grandma said I never lean on family for emotional support, so here I was leaning. She came downstairs in her robe and had to sit with me for an hour while I described my nightmare about being chased by giant spiders. I could see her exchanging desperate looks with grandpa like she was starting to realize what she'd created. After 2 weeks of constant calls and visits, grandma looked exhausted. She'd stopped bragging to her friends and started declining their invitations because she never knew when I'd need something. When I called during her doctor's appointment asking how to address an envelope, she sounded desperate. The woman who'd begged for my dependence was drowning in it. Finally, grandma called an emergency family meeting. She sat everyone down looking frazzled and tried to find a way to complain without contradicting everything she'd said about me being too independent. She started carefully explaining how I'd been very attentive lately. I pulled out my phone and showed everyone my call log with all 200 calls from the past 2 weeks. I'm just following grandma's advice about not being so independent, I said innocently. That's when my aunt chimed in about how grandma had criticized her for hiring a cleaning service. My uncle mentioned the comments about his meal delivery service. Even Alyssa admitted grandma made her feel guilty for using a wedding planner. Grandma sat there realizing she'd pushed everyone away with her criticism. Finally, she admitted, maybe independence isn't such a bad thing after all. She explained she was just scared of being forgotten. We worked out a compromise where I'd call her once a week for a real conversation and visit once a month for Sunday dinner. No more guilt trips about independence and no more 2 a.m. wake-up calls. Though sometimes when she starts to criticize someone for being self-sufficient, she catches herself and remembers those 2 exhausting weeks when she got exactly what she wished for.